am the author of an anthology by Broad Potomac's Shore, Great Poems from the Early Days of Our Nation's Capital, and a literary guide to Washington, D.C. I've also published 5 books of poems, most recently, The Scientific Method. I founded 2 literary journals, Beltway Poetry Quarterly and the Delaware Poetry Review. I wanted to actually talk to you today from my experience as a literary journal editor. You get to a point where you've written a bunch of work, you feel like it's finished, you're ready to get it out into the world, and it's time to develop some really basic tools. And I wanted to talk about one of those tools that you will need every time you apply for a grant, apply for a prize, apply for an artist residency, or importantly, in my case, if you send work out to anthologies or journals where you'd like to get published. So you want to make sure that you have certain things prepared in advance, that you don't have to make them up every single time. It saves you time and energy, and it also encourages you to submit to more often to things if you have all this stuff lined up in advance. So the things that you need to have lined up in advance are, of course, work samples, a short 1-paragraph biography. Some places might ask you also for an artist statement. What else? So, it's once you start applying for grants and fellowships, and once you start sending your work out to be published, you want to keep your drafts of all of the things that you've prepared and add to them, update them, so you don't have to make it all up every single time. So I had said that the bio is the most basic thing that you need. So I want to start there. And I will have to say in advance that one of my big pet peeves when I was working as a literary journal editor was people who did not send bios in the correct format. And I have to say, it's easy to stick to the format. And if you don't, you're giving editors and people who serve on panels an excuse to not take you seriously. So you don't want to do that. You don't want them to discount you before they've even read your work sample. So a bio, a 1-paragraph bio, should be somewhere between 2 and 5 sentences in length. It should not be longer than that. And the important thing to remember is that you are not writing your artistic statement. You're not writing your vision for your work. Your bio is purely factual. It should start with your full name, and it should be written in the 3rd person. I have occasionally seen people who write bios that start with some other clause before they get to their first name. Don't do that. Don't say, born in Charlotte, North Carolina, Kim Roberts is the blah, 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 because editors are going to change that. When they write up their contributors' notes, they're going to do it alphabetically by author's name, and they want your name first. So you start out by saying, Kim Roberts is. So again, talking about yourself in the 3rd person, it feels weird at first, but this is what you have to do to provide to editors. And you want to arrange your information. You don't get much information, you only get a few sentences. You want to arrange your information from most important credits to least, because if your bio goes long, editors will cut from the bottom up, okay? So if you have publication credits, that goes first. Kim Roberts is the author of such and such a book. Or if you haven't published a single author book yet, Kim Roberts has been published in, and then you name some journals. the such and such review, the such and such newspaper, and the such and such anthology. So you put your publication credits up first if you have them. If you do not have publication credits, don't worry, don't panic. You will eventually, but in the meantime, you need to give them other factual information that is relevant to you as a writer. You don't want to put in things that are not relevant to you as a writer. Here are other things you can put in the bio. You can talk about your work experience if it has anything to do with writing, teaching, editing, translating, something fairly literary. You can also put your education, which does not necessarily have to be related to writing. You can put where you live. Editors love to know that information. But again, don't give us factual, don't say Kim Roberts lives in Washington, D.C. with her fluffy cat and too many houseplants. No, that our editors don't want that. They're going to cut it. So you can say Kim Roberts lives in Washington, D.C. That's it. What else might be relevant? If you are fluent in other languages or sign language, that's also of interest and is related to your literary career. That would be a great thing to put in there. Thank you. And I totally forgot about that. If you have something that's part of your identity that might be related to your work, that definitely should go in. So you can give your race, your ethnicity, your religion, if you are disabled or not, and name your disability, your gender, your sexuality, any of those things are important identity markers. And editors love to know that. So, you know, I can say, Kim Roberts is the author of such and such. She has won these particular awards and residencies. Roberts is a Jewish queer writer living in the heart of Washington, D.C. Like I would leave the identity stuff for your last sentence. But that is also, thank you. I totally forgot that. That's really important information. A lot of editors right now are looking to have more diversity. So if you have some identity marker that counts you as diverse, then that can sometimes work in your favor. A lot of journals and anthologies are playing catch up for all of the decades when publishing was so white, straight, male dominated. Yeah, that's a great thing to add to a bio. So once again, I would just say important things that you can put in might be publications, prizes, other awards and fellowships, your education, if you have sort of special skills like in translation or speaking other languages, if your country of origin is different from the US, editors love to know that. Again, any sort of identifying markers of race, ethnicity, any sort of difference. And that's about it.
Wonderful.
If you have, again, something that is could be possibly cut from your bio, that should go toward the end.
Today, I'd like to tell you about world building and more specifically, how to bring your world building to a next level in fantasy. I'm better known for writing romantic suspense, but I've been veering toward fantasy for a few years already. I wrote dark fantasy title set in a world reminiscent of ancient Rome. So that took a lot of world building. And my next title, Of Blood and Light, will borrow from the tropes of body strippers and be set in a high fantasy world as well. So this is something I'm very passionate about, and I love spending hours scouring the web in search for information on how to build my world. If you are currently writing fantasy, or if you're contemplating doing that, you probably have this world building starter kit, which is basically geography, politics, and social groups. This is very obvious, like your geography, frozen world, desertic worlds, or very rich worlds is going to determine your politics, because, for example, if resources are rarefied, you're probably going to have dictatorial states and such, and those are going to in turn determine your social groups. And again, this is a very common trope in fantasy. You're going to see very airtight, very well-defined social groups, and usually the conflict is about being able to move from one social group to another, or having a relationship with someone from a different social group. And my issue with that is that often world building kind of stops there. We experience this new world through the lens of those three elements: the geography, politics, and social groups. And if you think about it, that's not the way you actually experience the world you live in your everyday life. You experience it through food, sounds, cultural references, and those usually then lead you back to political elements. For example, what you eat is what your country grows, what your country imports. That is determined by the political decisions of your leaders. And then starting from there, you may be thinking about the politics of your world. And so the point I would like to make today for anyone who's writing fantasy is that you should really, if you want to have a solid and really rich world building that really feels like an immersion in a different world, you might want to start with your sensory experience and really work on what are the species, how are seasons or time experience in your world. Are they obscure cultural references that everyone gets, but a foreigner wouldn't get them? And these, you can use those then to track back toward politics and social groups and get back, to the basics of fantasy. And that would give you a much richer world in this sense that that the reader is experiencing it as they read, and that they're immersed and that they're not taken off the experience. For example, I would recommend avoiding too many references to things that already exist in your world. The most obvious that comes to my mind is that recently I was reading a fantasy book set in a fairy court. By that point, everyone has guessed what series I'm talking about. And the characters were eating chocolate. And, that stopped me. I was like, wait, why? Why would you be eating chocolate? Why is there chocolate in your world? This is not explained. So yes, that would be the gist of it to me is if you want good world building, use your senses. Think about what you see and you hear and feel when you're standing in a room, and that can lead you back to broader topics of matters, of empires and politics, but start small.
Now, and I thought I would talk a little bit about how I became a writer. And I've got to say that I'm in need of a little encouragement today. We've all had a hard year, haven't we? Yeah, we have COVID. We're in the house. We've lost family members and friends. I lost a dear high school friend in April, and my aunt to breast cancer in April as well, and was not able to get back for funerals. And then we're missing the happy events too. Just yesterday, I was watching my niece graduate from Indiana University and watching it streaming online instead of being there able to celebrate with her. Luckily got that second jab. So, there's light at the end of the tunnel. But I'm hoping that in speaking to you guys and maybe giving you a little bit of encouragement from my journey, you guys can encourage me in return, because I think we all need that. I'll just start by talking about how I became a writer. Nothing special. I'm not one of those gung-ho journalism types whose fathers were journalists and used a chisel and stone to hammer out things for the square in Rome or what have you. I'm just a girl from Gary, Indiana, and nothing in my background really predisposes me to become a writer or a journalist. My family came to Gary the way that so many Black families came to Gary. They fled the Deep South as descendants of enslaved people. And my grandfather, for one, left Macomb, Mississippi, one step ahead of a lynching. And the job that he was looking for in the steel mill was not available in Youngstown, but it was available in Gary. So that is how my father's family came up. My mother's family is from Opelika, Alabama area. And similarly, they were moving north in the middle of the last century to find some freedom for themselves and find some new lives for themselves. And in doing so, many of us were able to go to college. Growing up in Gary, I was lucky to have parents who were college educated and very much motivated by the Black Power movement and everything that was going on in the 60s to ensure that my brother and I had the best education possible. And writing was always my thing. I just always instinctively understood how to put words together and was much better at putting those words together than I was at putting numbers together. But it took me a while to step into my actual purpose. I was one who, because I was one of the smart kids in school, they thought, yeah, you be an engineer, be a doctor, be a lawyer, do all these things. And nobody really said journalist except for one of the men around the corner who happened to be Harry Porterfield, who worked at that time at Channel 7 in Chicago. So he was our living, breathing broadcast journalist example, whose example I turned to when, after going to Purdue University and it being revealed to me very clearly that I should not in any way become an engineer. No, indeed. If you thought levees broke in New Orleans, that was minimal compared to the damage that I would have done if someone had allowed me to enter their engineering firm. So yes, fled to Indiana University and graduated in December of '89 with a degree in journalism and music, where I belonged. Most of my early time as a journalist was spent doing support things in the newsroom, like copy editing, wire editing, and I dabbled in some writing, mostly on a dare, I think, because newsrooms then, as they are now, are predominantly white. There is philosophy that perhaps Black girls from Gary, areas like that happen to be murder capitals and rife with all sorts of the urban ills that we've seen in the news. There's an idea that maybe we aren't the best at articulating our stories. Maybe we can't hack it. So whenever I had a writing assignment, whether it was splitting time with the courts reporter and the cops reporter just to try out their beats, I was on a mission to prove that Black girls do write, and that I in particular could definitely write. When I turned in 1A stories out of things that the usual reporters would have forgotten about. My first professional story was my first professional interview really was interviewing MC Hammer back in 1992, if anybody remembers. And it was the height of the parachute pants phase. He was everything. And he came to Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I was like, I'm getting this interview, and I don't care what the lead music reporter is. The music reporter is like, you can't get this interview. I'm like, watch me get this interview. And I went to the concert and I sat there all night long till about 5 o'clock in the morning until this man finally had some time to talk to me. I had exactly one question, but I asked him and he said, well, is that your only question? I'm like, yeah, that's the only question I need. I've seen everything else. So I went back and proved that I could get that interview. Fast forwarding then a few years later, once I kind of basked in the accomplishments I was able to do at Fort Wayne at age 23, I moved on to Dayton, to the Dayton Daily News. And I think that I can fairly say that this is when I really began to understand the power of words. As an editor there, I looked with interest as friends and colleagues went to the Million Man March in 1995 and how powerfully they wrote about it and what they seemed to bring out of it for themselves. So when it came to the Million Woman March, October 25th, 1997, I decided that I was going to go to this march and I was going to write about this march. And even though no one in the newsroom, particularly our very heavily white male editing crew, no one really understood the purpose of it, why it was necessary. And I remember the executive editor asking, well, why is Michelle going to this? And one of my white male allies said, well, she's the one who knows the most about it. She came to us and made a plan. So, she's getting on a bus and going up 12 hours with the women from Dayton to Philadelphia to report on this. So that was lesson number one for me, that if you know more about it than anybody else, then they have to let you go, right? Proceeding until apprehended with that one. So I get on the bus and there are all these Black women, young women, old women, all walks of life. And they look at me and they're hesitating. They kind of have an eyebrow up because I represent the mainstream media, which does not ordinarily represent the concerns of Black girls and women. But as we began to talk and as they began to understand me as a Black woman like them from an area that wasn't altogether all that different from Dayton, Ohio, they began to open up and I began to understand how me sharing my little bits of my story can encourage other people to share theirs. And slowly they began to tell me things that would be useful for me to use to articulate where they were coming from through mainstream media and to tell their stories. I will never forget one woman who told me, this was back when there was lots more talk about HIV and AIDS than there is now. And her son had died. And as a mother, she had done everything that she could to help him and to guide him on the right path. And when he strayed, to love him and to get him back on. So when he contracted HIV and then ultimately AIDS and died, she felt that deeply in her heart that she had failed as a mother. And as she's reciting the story to me, she begins to cry a little bit. And it makes me tear up a little bit to go back. I hadn't thought about that for years and years until I thought about what to say to you today. And she's tearing up a little bit and she says, I need to go to this march because I need to bury my son. And just the power of that statement, in knowing that it was a simple question, one Black woman to another, not even a reporter to a person, but one Black woman to another asking that was enough to draw this information out of her, something that's so deeply personal and hurtful to her, to draw that out, and that she was willing to share with me so that I could share with other people. I began to understand the power of writing and the power that I had in a position, no matter how small, to be able to communicate. So I say that with the Million Woman March, that is when I became a writer, because no matter what else I wrote in that very long, like 2-day period, 2.1 million women from all over the nation, all over the world really, who gathered in Philadelphia. Of everything that I wrote, and no matter whether it went to 1A or not, at one point I was standing, my computer equipment had failed, so I'm standing in the middle of the Philadelphia Inquirer newsroom, literally dictating my story into the phone, like you see in the old movies. I literally did that because I couldn't file it the way that I should, my computer, and I felt that power and the ability to maybe change some people's minds through the words. So I took that with me. Everything that I got, I can see clearly now, 30 years later, after I began this profession in 1990, I can see how everything that seemed maybe not to be as significant and maybe not to be as much of a point then. I mean, it was just one story, it was just one event. but everything I've been able to bring with me is what I can channel into projects like the one that we're getting ready to launch on Thursday. I want to tell you just a little bit about what happened after Million Woman March. I eventually decided that I needed to move the words into another atmosphere, so I came out to DC in late 1999 to work for Black Entertainment Television, and subsequently I also worked for the Smithsonian as a PR specialist. And working at these very high profile places, it gave me an opportunity to write, but it also gave me an opportunity to once again experience people from highest to lowest, I say. There was not MC Hammer, but there was better than MC Hammer at BET. I met Al Jarreau, who kissed me on the cheek upon finding out that he and I shared a birthday. And I was able to absorb how excited he was about releasing an album after what had been some years on hiatus, and when he thought that perhaps he wasn't going to be able to continue on as a jazz and R&B artist. Miriam Makiba, oh my goodness, meeting the woman married to Stokely Carmichael, a civil rights figure in her own right in terms of South African apartheid. And just the many, many people that you can imagine come in the door, every day at BET. We were like, oh, okay, Denzel's here again, whatever. It just got to that point. But I say that not to name drop as much as to say that in meeting these people of such names, I began to understand what was common to all of us. They too had stories, and complicated stories. I mean, Miriam Makiba's story, I was awestruck when I met her and got her autograph, but she had quite a story of just the hardship of trying to be an artist in South Africa and being in exile and married to Stokely Carmichael and literally not knowing what was going to happen to them after that. And so I learned that they are people, and that it's just a matter of sitting. And if you are honest and genuine, you allow them to be honest and genuine, and perhaps break through some of the facades that famous people need to put up in order to protect themselves. So I brought that knowledge into me. When I say from highest to lowest, maybe I shouldn't characterize it as lowest, but when I got to the Smithsonian and was in charge of a particular exhibit on Langston Hughes, they had not done anything to bring in Black audiences at the National Postal Museum. So I saw an opportunity to do that. One of the people who came was Langston Hughes's teacher from one of the schools around DC. And this is a person, this is not Miriam Makiba, but this is somebody very significant that you should know, that is living, breathing, walking in this museum. It has taken the bus over to the museum just to absorb what we had on Langston Hughes. So I've been blessed in such a way to meet all these people from all these walks of life. The Columbine children came by, those who had survived the incident came to the Smithsonian Postal Museum one day when I was working, and I was thrilled at being able to see their story, how their story was one of survival. And so too are some of the stories that I had encountered. Now fast forward to how I even ended up being at USA Today in the first place, because it wasn't planned. And I would not have applied for a job if it had said be features editor at USA Today. It was just nothing. I never wanted to go back to newspapers after Dayton. And when I was laid off from the Smithsonian, I figured, well, I'll just go over and work with a friend of mine over at Gannett and USA Today and do a couple months and wait it out. And that was 18 years ago. They kept giving me things to do and kept giving me interesting stories and assignments. I was promoted to features editor. And again, I'm thinking, well, this is the gig for me. This is all I wanted to do. Be features editor. We're going to talk about good food to eat. We're going to talk about the latest shoes and the colors that are out. And that's going to be it. But there were other plans for what I needed to do. A very good friend came to me and said, me and a videographer want to do this Black History section, but we don't have an editor. Nobody really wants to do it. Do you want to be our editor on a project? And I said, sure. And that project in 2006 was called Messages in the Music, where we did an 8-part series with some other reporters. So that launched me on the path to where I am now. That turned itself into a massive Civil Rights in America project in 2010. where I was asked to take everything that I had learned at all these various places and channel them into how USA Today is going to do projects. And that was 2010. I've done several other projects since then. The one that you all may have heard of, I'm sure you've heard of the New York Times' 1619 project. We too had a project. I led USA Today's 1619 project. And in so doing, got to go to Angola to cover the story. We were there to talk about one woman, Wanda Tucker, whose family, she says, descends from two of the initial 20 and odd enslaved people on that first ship to now Virginia. My charge, I had become fascinated with another story. I'd been talking to lots of people who were able to articulate for me how they could, what their story was. And here was a woman, Angela Jamestown, who could not articulate her story. Who the last anybody had heard or seen of her was in 1625. So when I went to Africa, I was assisting a living woman to tell her story and also assisting an ancestor to tell her story. And that was some of the best work and most fulfilling work that I've ever done, some of the hardest work I've ever done, and for me, some of the most personal work to tell this enslaved woman's story. It took everything within me to sit and be able to write that and give voice to somebody who couldn't speak and to inhabit her experience as an enslaved woman and as somebody who would come through the Middle Passage for weeks and weeks. The ship is pirated. Now she's in a place that she hasn't the slightest idea how far she is from home and speaking a completely different language, completely different structure. 2 years later, I'm still taking the information that I gathered there and how we put the stories together and channeling that into telling the stories of more ancestors and telling the more stories of lost histories. So that brings me to the evolution of 1619, evolving me into a better writer, a better journalist, and I like to think a better person as well, and helping me, assisting me, showing me, as the ancestors do daily, how to continue to tell these stories and giving me a mission that's very different from anything that I thought that I would start out with. So if there's anything that I would hope as a takeaway that I can share with you is you never know what you're going to need and where the lessons are coming from or what the lesson is. But I've come to see that they are revealed to you over time and in ways that you don't expect. And I just like to encourage everybody to ponder all the ways in which things that have happened to you, a lot of things for the negative, you can draw on later on and look back on and say, well, I see that I had to learn that in order to be where I am now and to be doing what I am now.
And good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. I hope that you are blessed and doing well. My name is Tracy, Lydia Garner. I'm an author of 14 novels and a couple of self-help books, inspirational. I'm in the DC area. Nichelle, we have to have lunch or something or get together. I'm in the Virginia side, just outside of DC, about 45 minutes, but I am the encourager. Isn't that so odd? I'm like chief encouragement officer over here. So I am going to bring some things for you to think about. 5 things I have, and I talk fast and I usually talk brief. So I know we're over time. So I just want to, but really Nichelle has already just laid the foundation and we just need to let it dry, really, honestly. So my thing is about what is your belief system? What are you doing with your craft and your writing and how is that? I'm going to pick on the ladies in just a minute, but they said my book, you haven't received my book, that's because nobody will never read it. Why would you ever say that? I've heard a lot of negative self-talk about these manuscripts, and I'm like, no. What is wrong with you? I'm gonna slap your hand and get my ruler out. So that cannot do. I want to know what everyone is doing in the chat to really set your morning, set your days. You are writers. You birth work. words and you say things, and those words have power. How dare you say nobody's going to read it, or it's not any good, or I wrote a little book and it's not, it's just here. Do you want to read it? Okay. That doesn't work. That does not work. These words have life. The words that you say, I look at my ideas every day like children. I want to encourage them. I want them to grow up and get really sustaining and gainful jobs. And I want them to be good. But if I tell them every day, you're not that good, you're nothing, you don't even sound right, what does that do to the person? It makes them feel bad. They don't even want to hang out with you anymore. And you have to be careful because you can go through an idea drought. I don't know if anybody's had some writer's block or things not visiting them. Were you nice to them? Were you kind to your ideas? Did you take them and let them grow? They aren't that great. Let's be honest, maybe at the beginning, but they need water. They need sunshine. They need food and nutrients. And every day, that idea that you had for a novel, that idea you had for a manuscript needs to be able to grow and fester and grow. So I need you to say daily affirmations every single day about how your day is going to go, about how much writing you're going to get done. Open those manuscripts every single day. I don't care if they just sit there among the other 4 million tabs that you have open. That's really slowing your computer down and limiting your ability to be great. But open another tab with that manuscript so that it can beckon you and that it can call to you. And maybe you'll write a sentence, and before you know it, you've written 10 sentences, and you've written, an entire page, another 1,000 words, Monday through Friday, every single day. So daily affirm that this is going to be great, that it has life, and that it is going to live and be wonderful and bless others. Next is let your mind be. Stop limiting yourself, talking down to your mind. Why did you think of that? Where did that come from? Oh, girl, you tripping today. That does not work. Those things are negative and they're self-sabotaging, and they just don't make you feel good about yourself. We're creators. We are helping people understand and be enlightened, and also learn and educate them through our words. What are you doing daily? You can tell a lot about a person about what they do daily. People call me and ask me, what are you doing? What's going on? I'm like, I'm working on my book again. I'm like, yes, well, I want to write a book. Well, you can't write it talking to me. So why don't we hang up the phone and you can go and write your book? You need to see what you're doing daily. Are you moving forward? Are you getting to your goal? What are the goals? Did you even write those down? I have written 14 books. Yes, in 20 years, I'm not even exactly where I want to be, but I'm so much further than where I have come and where I started. Every time I start a new book, I'm like, how am I possibly going to do this? 350 pages, 350 pages, about 100 to 102,000 words, almost a 400-page manuscript. I look at my old books and I'm like, girl, this is pretty good. Who wrote this? Because I can't even believe sometimes that I was able to do that and able to do it multiple times. So is it important to you? Are you working on it daily? Are you making a little bit of progress? Books do not write themselves, and they are not done after 1 week. It takes years. How many years have you been working on your own projects and trying to see them to fruition? So keep going and look at what you're doing daily. Nichelle talked about adversity. Adversity isn't something you should waste time asking, why did this happen to me? I have muscular dystrophy, which is a degenerative muscular disease that I was diagnosed at age 2. And I got my first wheelchair at age 6 in elementary school. I can't tell that because I'm on Zoom. I look like I'm in a regular, nice office chair. I'm in a $13,000 wheelchair, actually. And I have always been able to overcome my adversity, my setbacks. I've been bullied. I take all of those mean people, all of those horrible bosses, and they become the villains in my story. And they don't even know it. I'm writing about how mean you were to me. I'm making my story come alive even greater. Thank you for being mean to me. Thank you for being so horrible. I'm still at the same job where other bosses have been fired, and I continue to thrive and keep going. And they end up in my books with changed names because they are completely guilty of the adversity they have handed to me. They just don't know it. So turn your adversity into something. You are uniquely qualified to have empathy for people and to share your emotions and to understand what people are going through. We're all in a pandemic. We've all witnessed death. If you've lost a parent, you're qualified to tell someone else how to get through it. And you're also qualified to write a poem about it, to write something about it, and to share with other people that I've been through this too. When you go through things, sometimes you think you're the only person that's ever experienced divorce or someone dying or losing a loved one. You're not the first, and you certainly won't be the last. Channel that into your writing, make your writing much more deeper, much more empathetic. And then that's what makes stories come alive. And it's the ability to resonate with other readers, that deep emotional thing that you have. Lastly, honor your God-given talents. If you do not honor those, you will die with them inside. And that is just so tragic. You cannot leave this earth. You hear about people who wanted to write a book, and I'm just thinking, oh my God, why didn't they just write me? I would have helped them. I am a book coach. I have had 9 people that I've helped publish their books and see them on through. I had one author who is my greatest success story. I admit she would have been successful had she not stopped by my little classroom, but she has written 25 books in 5 years. One of my greatest success stories. I'm so proud of her, but she's also in the military, which I think had something to do with it. She's retired now, but I take my little credit and use it in my marketing materials. Nobody has to really know. So honor your God-given talents and don't let them die inside you, being unrealized and untouched. You are here right now. You are breathing and living. You survived the pandemic. What a blessing. So use all of that breath that you have to get your projects done and to realize your hopes and dreams for your writing.
And the thing about revision is a completely different mental process than creative writing is. Revision is all about making judgments about what you wrote and figuring out how to improve it and figuring out what to leave in and what to cut and all kinds of stuff like that. It's kind of like having that mean 9th grade grammar teacher on your shoulder. And as you're typing, they're going, no, you shouldn't say that. You shouldn't, you say it this way, you know? It's really important, I think, for us to separate our writing into phases. And when we're writing a draft, like Tracy says, you got to keep writing it. You know, keep writing that draft and don't worry about making changes and don't worry about revising it. You can do that later on. I think probably the best writing advice I ever got was from someone who was quoting Anne Lamott. And forgive my language, but she said, you have to give yourself permission to write a shitty first draft because everybody has enough talent to write a shitty first draft, right? We can all do that. I could sit down now and just start writing a shitty first draft and just, it would be awful, but it would be a first draft. And then I would be able to revise it into something that wouldn't be quite so bad. Okay, but you have to give yourself that permission not to be perfect right from the start. I tend to be a perfectionist. I was raised by a perfectionist, and so I have that in me, and I'm always fighting with that because to me that's what tangles you up and makes you not write well. So for me, it's really, really super important to just go with it. Keep writing every day. Just take out that manuscript and keep on working it and keep going until you write those words the end for the first time. Okay, I mean, make sure you get all the way through. If it's a novel or a short story or an article or anything you're writing, a poem, whatever, get from the beginning all the way through to the end. And then once you're done, then you can start doing the revision process. But first, you've got to get all those words and ideas out on the page. We don't know where these ideas come from. We don't know where these characters come from. It's like they're this gift that we get in our heads. Lots of times I'll be doing something like cleaning or something awful like that, and a character will just come visit me and just will start talking to each other, you know, and we'll just start being together for a while. I love it when that happens, and I'm not going to say, wait a minute, I can't do that. You can't say that way. We can't say things that, you know, we have to say it this way. That wouldn't be right. So the main thing is to just keep on going. Um, Michelle's got a really good comment here to get to a point in the research where you stop and just write the damn thing. The darn thing. That's where I am right now. I am fussing between research and writing, and I have to get my butt in the chair and just do the writing. But after you get it written, then you can sit down and really look at it. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on what to look for or all that, but I just want to say, do it in multiple passes. I know sometimes if we've been struggling with a piece of writing, we're so glad to get to the end that we kind of don't want to go back and deal with it again. Sometimes we may not like it anymore and it's not as much fun anymore, but you really have to go back, and you need to go back maybe 3 or 4 times, however many times it takes. You first look at the big picture stuff, and then later on, you go down into the nitty gritty stuff and you worry about the words and the punctuation, all that editorial stuff. But first, you look at the big picture. How do you know when that point is? I honestly don't know. I honestly don't know. Um, I would keep revising until I had a deadline, and then once I have a deadline, I have to submit something. Then off it goes. But I'm a real nitpicky reviser, so I can just keep on going and keep on going. But the main point is look at the big picture first. Look at your overall structure. Look at the major points of the story. Make sure your plot doesn't have any big holes in it. Make sure your characters grow and develop as the story moves on. Make sure you make it easy for us to picture the action and the setting. And then after you do the big stuff, then you can go down and look at that small stuff that tends to be what's bugging us all the time anyway. So that's really all I have to say. Just make sure you're okay with not being perfect, and let yourself just go and keep writing and let that story take over for you, and let the pressure of that story come through every day. So you just have to sit down and get it written, and that'll make you so much happier when you sit down to revise, once you have that big chunk of manuscript in your hands. And I always recommend printing it out, because until you print it out, you see those papers and you'll hold that thick stack of writing. It feels so good to do that. Even if you know that it's your shitty first draft, you still got that big thing of writing, and then you can really work on it. So that's my advice, and thank you very much.
Yeah, so I'm Jessica Case. I'm the deputy publisher of Pegasus Books. And, I am here to talk a bit about publishing, kind of the publishing process, what happens, when I acquire a book, and kind of the full publishing process. Because I think, knowing what happens down the pike kind of helps people when they're working, and kind of what, we'll be looking for and expecting here. Review of the publishing process. So the submission process, and this is all done from my vantage point. And then I think, we can do questions later, because I'm sure there'll be some good questions. So when I am looking for things to acquire, a literary agent will query me on the manuscript and share their pitch letter. And then I'll, say, yes, this sounds perfect. This sounds like just what I'm looking for. I can't wait to start reading. Or no, we're not really doing much in the children's space, or we're not doing much fantasy right now. And a lot of agents, they know me, and maybe we've done deals together in the past, or at least they've been following what I've been acquiring. So they kind of know kind of what to pitch me on. And then if it looks like it might be a good fit, I'll ask to see the manuscript or proposal. So making an offer. If I love the manuscript or proposal, that's obviously the first step. Quality and emotional connection is tantamount. There can be kind of trends in publishing, like coloring books or sexy vampires, but at the end of the day, quality is where it is for me. And then, of course, once we love the book, we like the proposal and thinks it has some potential, then we have to kind of do our financial and business considerations. Have we published similar books like this in the past? Is this something we think we can launch successfully based on our own particular strengths? Certain books we've tried over the years, and maybe we aren't able to launch them. I don't know if it's a disconnect with our marketing or something like that, but certain genres we've just said, oh, even though we love them, that's just not something we think we can be the best champion of. Other things we can do really well with. So then we kind of look at that and run some numbers and compare, past history. And then also, what does the overall market look like for similar titles? Is it overly saturated? Was it something that was really popular, but maybe on a little bit of a downward trend? Those are all things we'll kind of factor in when we're thinking about making an offer. Then if all the stars aligned, we'll send the agent an offer that details our advance, our royalty structure, which is what is paid through once the advance has been earned out by sales. Other considerations, are we going to publish in hardcover first? Is it going to be a paperback original? Who gets to control audiobook rights? And then once it's all signed, we are off to the races. And then once I acquire a book, I will work through the manuscript and kind of a line edit. That'll be kind of the greater structural feedback, argument points if it's nonfiction, character development, tone, the conclusion, do we need to fix the epilogue? Are we leaving the reader with the right message? And then once we're kind of happy with the manuscript as a whole, we'll move to copy editing. We'll do like the fine tooth comb for tense and style. And, if it's a crime novel, oh, you said the character got off the train at 6 o'clock after riding there for 3 hours, but you said that, but they left at 1. What is it? Kind of plugging all those holes. A good copy editor will be good for that. And then once copy editing is complete, we send to production to be typeset, then it really starts to look like a book, kind of fully designed. And, then it stops looking like a Word document and something that's, really real. And while we're kind of doing all this back and forth, we'll also be talking about a cover design and looking through different covers that the author and I both like, that we think might be good comps for our designer to put something together. Whether it's, nonfiction or a novel, the cover is the primary ad for the books. We really want to make sure we get it right. And things kind of come in and out of fashion for covers. It's so funny, even with Instagram, we've noticed over the past couple of years, cover designs have really changed to really pop in like that small thumbnail format versus, gosh, when I first started in publishing, it was really like, what does it look like on the shelf, in the store, in a big stack. So design aesthetics have definitely changed. And while the edit is happening, and the writer and I are going back and forth, we prepare sales material for our sales team. Our sales team is with Simon & Schuster. We're distributed by them. And the sales team goes out and gets the retail accounts excited. They go out to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, indie stores, libraries, and more. And then the retailers will also sometimes offer some cover feedback as warranted, saying, oh, it's so beautiful, but did you know that novels with musical instruments on the cover really don't sell? That's like, apparently that's a truism. So, then we might have to go back and adjust the cover one more time. And then also while this is all going on, we have a rights manager and they will be out there kind of pushing for foreign language translations or audio rights, depending if we, control those rights in the end. And then once the book is kind of, pretty much off into production, we turn to publicity and marketing. It's a noisy world out there in media. Book marketing and publicity is definitely an all hands on deck approach, just to cut through the noise of everything that happens in the world today. So this is the time for the author to call in any and all favors from media connections. Oh, your high school buddy is now like a books reporter at the Santa Barbara News, like reach out. And for the author to ramp up on social media too. We pitch the book to book media using that early typeset of the book. And we reach out to reviewers, book editors at the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. Then there's radio, other print and online publications, podcasts, television producers, bloggers. We've got big databases of all these people, and we'll kind of curate specific lists for your book to see, to try to get as much coverage as possible. As then on the marketing front, as an indie press, our ad budgets are lean, but we definitely want to be strategic with kind of more paid promotions, whether it's via Goodreads and giveaways or Amazon ads or BookBubs, which is like discounting for ebooks. So we really want to do a full court press on both ends of the kind of promotion angle. Social media is kind of in this amorphous, publicity and marketing space. We have a dedicated social feed for Pegasus. We do have to love all our children equally. So, we're always trying to divide, make sure we're covering and championing all our books, in a fairly equal way on social media. So the author's feed is often a huge asset here. And we always talk about a good strategy for every book, because every book is a little bit different based on the author's platform, the subject of the book, how social media savvy they are. Some of our older authors are a little bit of a lost cause as far as Twitter and Instagram goes. We kind of focus them mostly on Facebook. They ask me if they should be on TikTok, and I say, don't worry about that. Let's just focus on where your strengths are. And I think, just generally, we find that the authors, you want to keep that organic voice. You don't want to do too much selling of the book all the time every day, because I think people tend to get tired of that and start to tune it out. So you kind of interspersing it with a more general content about writing, the subject of your book, what you're working on, what's exciting for you, cover reveals, and even championing other writers, connecting with other writers in your genre or subject area or community can be great allies come launch. And it's a way to mix up the content of your feed, so it's not always, about the buying the book too, becomes a little too pushy, I think. And then it's just some last thoughts, getting a publishing contract is difficult and often frustrating. Don't be discouraged. Just even at Little Pegasus, we receive hundreds of submissions every week. And we only publish 100 new books every year. So, it's just really, there's just, sometimes it's just a volume and a numbers game. And it's been, it's tough out there in general for book sales, just between COVID and Amazon and everything else, so it can take time. And I think, one thing that helps, I think, with the submission end, when you're kind of crafting letters to reach out to agents and querying people, is to read widely and critically. I think it's hugely helpful to check out book reviews in major papers, as well as websites. LitHub can be a great resource, or Publishers Weekly, because that way, you kind of see what's out there. You see what's being published, what's, how your work and how your story might fit in to kind of the new books that are coming out now. And it'll just give you a better knowledge of the trade in general, because it's a strange business, but it's an exciting one. All right.
Lydia, South Dakota. I teach at South Dakota State University, mostly creative writing classes, some literature classes. And what I would like to do today is to teach you the one strategy that I teach all of my students and everyone in every workshop that I do, and that's how to read as a writer. Because if you know how to read as a writer, then you can teach yourself the kinds of strategies from your favorite writers to kind of implement it to generate new work and to also revise your own work. So I'm mostly a poet. I have almost 8 books of poetry published. My new one is coming out next month, The Poet and the Architect. I'm also an essayist and a memoirist. So those are, I write across genres, although mostly poetry. So I do have a PowerPoint as well. So I will share my screen. Oh, but I can't yet. So if you could let me share my screen, then I will.
Oh yeah, you have a co-host.
Right, here we go. Okay, I love this. I love PowerPoint, not really, but oh, just hold on just a second. Wait from the start. Okay, so you know that already. So reading as a writer means analyzing a piece of writing to understand how it functions, and then using that to revise or invent your own. And here's the elements. This is just a smattering of elements that you can look at and analyze: the details, the narrative, the subject, the point of view, the tension, the genre, the arrangement, all those rhetorical strategies. You can look at the diction, and you can start to look closely at the way the writer uses them, and then you can borrow that for your own work and teach yourself some new things. So I'm going to show you how to do this, and I don't have much time, so I'm sorry. I wish we had more time, maybe in the future. So this is a poem that's in my new book called Didactic. And it has an epigraph: love is an intense form of curiosity. So throw open the library of your body, run your fingertips across the shelf spine, over atlases, dictionaries, novels. Your hands, wide, strong, are lenses that ignite encyclopedic knowledge. Let's burn in biography, biology, ask questions, unlock the map of scars, read lines of rib, linger at the hip, memorize the archive's lips. Stretch your supple pages until you are open, explicit, and known. So, of all the things that you see on that side, I'm going to show you 3 different ways that you could learn from my poem. Okay, so you could read my poem as a writer and learn from it. The first is the subject and the metaphor. So I use the metaphor of library, right? This poem compares the physical attraction to curiosity and intellectual pursuits. And so for me, I'm such a nerd that's always like, oh, libraries, books, like museums, like that is sexy for me. I married another professor. He's an architect, architecture professor. So anyway, you can kind of see where that goes. And in the book, my book starts out like this really intimate poetry and then kind of expands out. So you can say, all right, from this, I'm going to write a poem about love, and I'm going to compare love to, and then you come up with your own metaphor. Or you could even just say, I'm going to compare love to an intellectual pursuit, but my intellectual pursuit is cooking, or my interest is this, or my interest is that. So you can take and then try to translate how would you describe what it feels like to fall in love and be in love and all of that energy of that new relationship kind of thing in your own metaphor, and generate a new poem or a new story or a new essay. Like, this isn't just for poetry. You can do this with any genre, but you're really isolating one technique that the writer has used and then borrowing that for your own. So point of view is something else. This poem uses second person and addresses the lover. So I'll write a poem that addresses someone else too. And I call it didactic because it is like telling someone what to do. Throw open. It's like that second person, like do this and do that. And so it's this, I did that because of the teacher academic thing. And I wanted to kind of push against those ideas of libraries being boring and academics being boring, and redo that there a little bit. So you could take a second person point of view and write your own piece based on that point of view, and maybe teach someone something. Like, what do you want to teach, or what do you want to show, and take that really confident point of view, right? The didactic, the teacherly has to be confident and assertive. That's the word I was looking for, assertive. So that's another way that you could use this poem. And then another way is the genre of the form. And frankly, like, this is one of my favorite things to do, is look at the way someone's arranged something. So I had to do this with my memoir, my manuscript memoir. I had never written one before. And so I had to really read carefully all the ways that other writers that I admired structured their memoir, because I was writing it like a poet and thinking about little bits, and I didn't think of the narrative arc until I had the whole thing written and had to like rewrite it with the narrative arc. So this is something that I do all the time with little and big things. So small poems and big manuscripts. But this poem uses like 6 tercets, 3-line stanzas with short lines. I'm going to imitate this structure for my poem, right? So you just actually borrow the structure or the arrangement, and you use that for your own. I've done this, taken the rhyme words of the end of lines from somebody else's poem and written my own poem, totally different than that person's poem, except for the same rhyme lines at the end as a generative tool, the same like rhyming words, not lines, but the rhyming words at the end of the lines. It's just a fun exercise to kind of generate some new work and maybe some revision of a piece you're stalled out on. So I can stop the share there and talk a little bit more about any of those in depth that you had. Like, I know that was really like super fast. So I can talk a little bit more about any of those concepts and like kind of think through how I think through them when I'm looking at a poem, or I'm looking at a piece to read as a writer. So to read it as a writer. So you can take the ideas, the subject matter, you can write your own version of it. You can look at you could even structurally, you can analyze the syllables or the metrics of the poem and use that for your own piece. When I'm writing essays, sometimes I look at like a segmented structure or braided structure, because my essays are typically lyrical essays. So I look at the structure that someone else has used, and I kind of say, okay, I could probably use that for my piece. Or endings. To be honest with you, I struggle with endings. I don't know. I have not mastered that yet. after all these years. So I will look at the ends of like 5 or 6 pieces and I'll say, well, how did that person end this? Okay, what technique is that? How can I use that technique in my own piece to end my own? Oh, they've gathered up all the elements or all the images from the beginning of the piece and they've taken it through and brought it back to the end. Aha, I can do that for mine. What are my images in this essay or this piece that I'm going to gather up and put in the end for conclusion? Or, oh, this poem ends on this really fantastic like gesture or crisp image. Okay, I'm going to make sure that my poem ends on a similarly crisp image.
Hey, my name is Laura Chauvin. I do a lot of things which I can tell all of you also do. I am a poet. I'm a former literary magazine editor. I write for children. I write middle grade. I'm a book coach for the Writers Ally. Oh gosh, I'm a dog mom, a knitter, lots of things. But I wanted to today talk a little bit about submitting to literary magazines. And since we've been talking so much about marketing, I'm going to start by saying that literary magazines are, believe it or not, a great marketing tool. If you are planning to query for agents later on in your career, having placed poetry, short stories, essays in the small press world is a really great thing to have in your bio to prove that you have the chops and that you're somebody with a publishing history that an agent would like to take on. It also, if you are writing a novel or if you're writing a memoir, publishing a chapter that can stand alone in a small press magazine, in a literary journal, is again a really great thing to be able to go to an agent or an editor with and say, look, you know, the Little Patuxent Review, I'm just using that because that's the journal I used to edit, published the first chapter of my book in their journal. So it has literary quality. It's kind of like a way to get your foot in the door. So I'm going to go over a bunch of things about how this process works. The first thing I think is really important is to decide on your priorities. If you're just breaking into the literary market world, that's going to lead you to aim for certain types of magazines. If you are an established author, you might say to yourself, I only want to publish in the top 50 literary magazines in the country. If you're in it for the money, you're going to be looking for paying markets. Again, as I said, you might be looking for publishing credits for a book that you're working on by sending out a chapter or a piece of that book. So once you've decided on your priorities, then you have to set a goal for yourself. I think a lot of people from the different writer websites I'm on, they get caught up in like, there are so many journals to submit to, and what do I do? Where do I start? For me, having a goal is really important. My goal is I have to send out one submission a month. I do not judge myself where I send it. I can send it to a brand new literary magazine that is run by 7th graders if they're accepting adult work. Doesn't matter. My goal is send out one piece of writing a month at least. And that's a goal that's realistic for me. I can stick to that. So for you, it could be that over the course of a year, you want to send out 12 poems. They can all go out at once. It might be that you have a particular literary journal. Your favorite author was published in it when their career was starting. So that's your goal. So it really depends what your goal is on what you send out to. Really depends on what your larger goals are, your priorities are. But for me, keeping to that rule of once a month works really well. It's important. You're going to do research based on these priorities and goals. So you might be guided, like I am, by upcoming deadlines. The first thing I look at is what's due this month. And even if I've never heard of the journal before, if I have something that I think is going to be a good fit and their deadline is this month, that's who I'm sending to because I'm making it easy on myself. So upcoming deadlines, you might read an issue of the journal, especially if they have, usually they'll send out for, limited fee, a sample copy, but they might also have some work posted online. And you might also be paying attention to the genre. It might be a genre specific magazine, like there are science fiction literary magazines that only do sci-fi or horror. Or there might be a literary journal that's doing a special issue on tea, let's say. I love tea too, English breakfast for me. And so you might have a poem or a story on that topic that's perfect to send out. All right, once you've done all that, the most important thing to do is to check on the guidelines. So each journal has separate guidelines for you to follow, and follow those to the letter. Because if you don't take the time to follow what the journal is saying about your format and whether to put your name on your piece of writing, if you're not paying that time and attention, but then you're asking them to pay time and attention to your writing, that's kind of unfair. So do your homework in that way. Like, for instance, if it says put your bio in your cover letter, then you're going to do that. If it says we don't want cover letters, leave the cover letter off. And pay attention to all those things. Yes, I'm going to post a bunch of places that are resources for finding out calls for submission. One of the best ones I'll just mention, or one of the ones that you probably, if you're going to work in this field of literary journal, if you want to send work out, you will need to set up a submittable account, which I'll put in the link. It's free for you to set up. And many literary journals use that as their submission portal. So it's a must-have. And they also, though, let's say I wrote a horror story where a cowboy falls in love with a butterfly fairy. And I'm going to plug that into submittable. And oh my gosh, look, this literary journal wants exactly what I wrote. Can you believe it? I'm going to submit to them. So I know that's like way more specific than would happen in real life. But, you know, cowboy horror, maybe you have a story, cowboy horror, and you put that in, and lo and behold, there's somebody who's looking for that. What you're submitting, you're going to put it in a Word file. In most cases, that's what the journals are asking for. So it's a Word doc. Follow the guidelines as far as how they want you to call, what they want you to call the file. Usually it has your last name in it, times Roman 12. The standard for prose and poetry submissions, I mean, for format, is usually what's called for, unless the guidelines say otherwise. And then if you're going to include a cover letter, it's very straightforward. It can be super short. You might include a reason for writing. I admire your magazine, or you've published my work before, or you published somebody whose work I really like. Thank you for considering. Then you list the titles of the works that you're sending in, and you have your contact info. And that's it. That's a very short cover letter. The only other thing, two other things I wanted to say. I personally use a tracker. And all right, this is what I do. I have the list, as you can see, the name of the journal, when I sent it, what I sent, and then I'm going to come over here and show you if I can grab this. Oh, it's over here. No, I'm having trouble dragging this for you, but there we go. And then the results and any notes that I have. I just color code them, and I have one of these for every year. So this year, pink means success, and gray means failure, or I shouldn't say failure, rejection from that particular magazine. But I also, this is really important, I keep a separate list here of poems that are out. I don't usually submit more than 2 places for each poem, because if something is accepted, I want to be able to very quickly go to the other editors I've submitted to and say it's no longer available. And for me, I don't want to do more than 2 people, because then I'm going to have to track down. So I just keep track of making sure that I don't have anything that's out to 2 more journals. And here I have a list. These are my pieces that have been accepted so far this year, down in the bottom corner. And then the longer list of pieces that have been rejected this year and by whom. So keeping that is really helpful for me. And it also, I will show you over here quickly, if I can get over to here. I don't know if you'll be able to see that or not, but I also I track for myself. This was my April submission. Hooray, I did it. I submitted in April. And so I'd applaud myself. Submittable, really important one, like I said, because a lot of journals use that as their portal. Duotrope used to be free. It is now paid. I don't know how much it is, but same kind of idea. You can search what people are looking for. So again, if you wrote a poem that's about horror, you'll be able to find the magazines that publish that. I really like this blog, Publishing and Other Forms of Insanity. I subscribe to their newsletter. Every month they send a list of paying literary journals that have a deadline coming up. So that's one that I go through. You know, I spend 20 minutes once a month and go through and highlight things that look interesting to me. I belong to a calls for submission Facebook group that you'll see there. There's a poet named Allison Joseph who for many, many years has had this creative writers opportunities list. And again, literary journals will go and post their calls for submission there for specific work. This is encouraging. I think the thing is, especially from, I can't remember which group it was. It may have been in the calls for submission group. I think that people get caught up in like, I have to submit to, you know, the top literary magazines, and they get themselves stressed out. For me, I want to make it as easy as possible on myself to be able to stick to my goal and achieve it. And like I said, in my case, that means I'm sending out once a month and I am not judging myself about where I'm sending it. And that means over the course of a year, if I'm sending out once a month, I have a pretty good success rate. I know I have more rejections than acceptances, but I still, if I am not sending out work at all, guess what happens? There's no acceptances coming in. And it's just, even though I'm a children's author, I'm mostly known as a children's author. I really like having my toes into the literary market world, because sometimes it's a long time between books as a children's author, but poetry, you know, I can send a few things out. I might hear a few months later back from the journal, and it's just keeping my toes in and keeping my adult poetry going. That's what I tend to publish in these literary magazines. And it's, you know, it's nice to have a bookshelf with journals that you've had work published in, if it's a print journal, or on my website to be able to have the links to places where my poetry has been published online. So I would highly recommend it. And then when you are published, what you're going to do is you're going to go in the back of the journal and you're going to read everybody's bios, and you're going to highlight the places where they've been published. Because if you're published in a journal alongside somebody else, then your work is at the level that theirs is at, and you can start building a list of where you'd like to submit based on who you're published alongside, if that makes sense.